Right, so now I'm going to talk about the next two nerves, part of the cranial nerves, called the bulbar nerves. So this is going to be a three-part series about the bulbar nerves. And the bulbar nerves are 9, 10, and 12. Okay, they're called bulbar because they are situated in the medulla oblongata, so the lower part of the brainstem, and they all form this sort of like bulge or this swelling, and that's why they're called bulbar nerves. And if there's a lesion in these sort of nerves, then you get something called bulbar syndrome. Okay, so we're going to start off with the ninth cranial nerve, which is the glossopharyngeal nerve. And you can kind of actually tell what, you can look at the name and you can get a clue about what this sort of does, what this nerve does. So look, if you look at the glossal part, that means tongue. And if you look at the pharyngeal part, that means the pharynx, of course, right? So okay, let's talk about the anatomy of the glossopharyngeal nerve. Actually, it makes more sense to talk about the glossopharyngeal nerve alongside the vagus nerve, because they both go hand in hand. They have similar nuclei, in fact, the same nuclei. So whenever you talk about glossopharyngeal nerve, often it's examined with the vagus nerve. So if you look at the anatomy, like I said, they come from the medulla oblongata of the brainstem, and we'll talk about later about where it actually exits from in the cranial fossa. Okay, so it is a mixed nerve, of course. Mixed meaning it has sensory function, it has a motor function, and and it even has a special function, and special just means taste, so it's involved in taste as well. Okay, so if we look at the nucleus, so the nuclei of the glossopharyngeal nerve, so there's different nuclei that do different functions. Okay, so you can always split into sensory and motor. If you look at motor first, this is the nucleus ambiguus. Okay, the nucleus ambiguus consists of both 9 and 10, so vagus nerve and glossopharyngeal nerve. All right, the glossopharyngeal nerve, because it's a motor nerve, is going to innervate one particular muscle, and that is the stylopharyngeus nerve. So that's where the pharyngeal part of the glossopharyngeal name comes from. So it innervates one muscle, which is the stylopharyngeus. We then have the vagus nerve, which actually innervates different sorts of muscles, and we'll talk about that later when we actually talk about the 10th cranial nerve. So obviously this is going to provide motor function for the throat and allow us to swallow and whatnot, have a bit of speech as well. And then we have the sensory part. Okay, so the sensory part, that's the next component. So we have the motor and sensory part. So we have a nucleus called the inferior salivatory nucleus. Okay, so salivatory, saliva. This is going to provide parasympathetic innervation for the parotid gland. That's the largest gland which can produce saliva. So that's of course going to help with swallowing. Then we're even going to have the solitary tract nucleus. Solitary tract nucleus corresponds to the taste, gustation. That's the fancy word for taste. And this is going to provide taste sensation for the posterior 2/3 of the tongue. Okay, so the posterior 2/3 of the tongue. If you remember, or if you know cranial nerves, you know that the anterior third is the facial nerve. Okay, so that's that. We have the solitary tract nucleus, the inferior salivatory nucleus for the parotid gland, and then we have another nucleus which is actually the spinal tract nucleus. And if you watch my last video about the trigeminal nerve, this is the same nucleus as well, and it provides like general sensation for the pharynx and all the associated structures in the throat. And then all these branches and nucleus and whatever will leave via the jugular foramen. So it exits via the jugular foramen, and it's actually the same foramen that the vagus nerve exits from. So remember that when we talk about the glossopharyngeal nerve, always link it like alongside the vagus nerve because they both go hand in hand. Okay, so that's that. What's next? So after that, we have the the anatomy. Let's talk about the general sort of examination that we're going to do. So the examination, if you know your anatomy well, you understand why we're doing certain things in examination. So first of all, we look for symmetry, which is basically one of the first things you should do when you look at any cranial nerve. When you look at symmetry, there's supposed to be a mouth, okay? And if you look inside, you're supposed to look at the uvula, which is that hanging little thing at the back. And you also have like different sort of arches, like pharyngeal arches basically. So this is pharyngeal arches. Okay, and we're looking for asymmetry here. So if there's a problem, if there's a lesion somewhere, there may be a problem in, there may be some sort of flaccid paralysis. This may be a bit weak. And actually the uvula, whatever, will it will move towards the unaffected side. Okay, because if you like take a zoom in the uvula, this part here, the lesion, that's, let's say there was a lesion here on the right side, right? Because there's no muscles that's gonna actually like push this side here, the muscle basically pulls it towards this side because this part is weak, if that makes sense. Yeah, so then we have, as well as that, we have so just general, which basically asks the patient to do general things. So for example, we get the patient to say ah, because to make sounds with their voice, because obviously the glossopharyngeal nerve and the vagus nerve, they've got roles in speech, and you'll see vagus nerve specifically has this role, but the glossopharyngeal nerve also kind of helps with that. So you get them to say ah, you get them to make do a tongue twister, like how much wood can a woodchuck chuck, all that sort of stuff. You may ask the patient about just general, like how much saliva do they produce, okay? And yeah, and then another thing that we can do as well is the gag reflex, okay? The gag reflex, because the afferent part, the nerve entering the thing, the central part, which component of the reflex arc, is going to be the glossopharyngeal nerve, and then the central part is going to be the nucleus ambiguus, and then you're going to get the efferent parts to be both the glossopharyngeal nerve and the vagus nerve. So and make sure when you're doing the gag reflex to basically target each side of the mouth, basically. So each side of the throat. So if you look at the uvula, if you were to look at the patient's head on, right, there's two parts here. You would basically put a stick and sort of stimulate that part first, and then you go to that part to see if there's any differences in the reflex, okay? So now let's talk about syndromes, okay? Syndromes. So with the glossopharyngeal nerve, you can have something called glossopharyngeal neuralgia, and neuralgia just means, pain, really severe pain, okay? So glossopharyngeal neuralgia, think logically about where the glossopharyngeal nerve is, okay? So if the glossopharyngeal nerve is irritated, and we're just talking about how the glossopharyngeal nerve is responsible for the part of the pharynx and the back of the tongue and all that, then obviously the pain is going to be at the base of the tongue, since, the gustation, that's what's responsible for gustation, for taste sensation of the back of the tongue. So you can get severe pain in the back of the tongue. It may even radiate towards the ear, because if you think about how the jugular foramen goes, it goes towards that sort of side, okay? You may even get some sort of contractions, basically, sort of some palatine contractions, which is basically called clonus. That's not really that common to see. But yeah, you may even get paralysis as well. So if you have paralysis of the the glossopharyngeal nerve, you'll probably definitely see some asymmetry, okay? You're going to see that this side is a bit, for example, there's a lesion here on the left side. You can see that this, the pharyngeal muscles are a bit weaker. The uvula might as well, go back going back to what I said about how the uvula will go towards a certain direction. Okay, so that's, you can get glossopharyngeal nerve paralysis there. And obviously, because of this paralysis, and the glossopharyngeal nerve and the vagus nerve go hand in hand, you'd get speech problems. So things like, aphonia, or even like dysphonia, which basically means difficulty speaking and producing speech. You may even get dysarthria, okay, and dysphagia as well, because obviously these muscles are responsible for actually contracting and allowing food to go down your throat, your windpipe. Sorry, not your windpipe. Definitely not your windpipe. Your esophagus. So yeah, if you have a problem there, then that's what's called dysphagia, difficulty swallowing. So ask the patient about. So they're swallowing. For gustation, which is the taste, you can put a salty solution or sugary solution on the tongue. See what happens. See if they can taste that or not. That's pretty much glossopharyngeal nerve. Vagus nerve is the next nerve, nerve 10, and again it's pretty much very similar to glossopharyngeal nerve. Again, it's a mixed nerve, but this time it has also visceral like nuclei as well. Okay, so it has the the nucleus ambiguus, which is for the motor function of all the muscles except the stylopharyngeal, so like the pharynx, the larynx, muscle controlling the epiglottis, all that sort of stuff. So this is the nerve that's definitely responsible for the speech and the swallowing. Okay, the visceral nuclei is actually called the dorsal nuclei. Okay, and this is the nuclei which is going to provide visceral, so smooth muscle function for like the heart, the lung, and because it provides different sort of parasympathetic functions, visceral functions towards different organs. Vagus actually means in Latin wandering, so it's a wandering nerve. It goes to all different parts of our body. All right. So that's that. We have the visceral nuclei, the nucleus ambiguous. Okay. We also have just general nuclei for just general sensation. Okay. And yeah, what else is there? That's pretty much it. The examination is going to be pretty much the same as the glossopharyngeal nerve. The anatomy is pretty much the same. So it comes out from the medulla oblongata. It goes out from the jugular foramen, and there's actually two ganglion that is important. So at the jugular foramen, there's two ganglions that can come out. So you have the superior ganglion and the inferior ganglion. The superior ganglion is the ganglion that provides the innervation for like the pharynx and the larynx and the epiglottis. The inferior nuclei is the inferior ganglion is going to provide the sensation to like this cardiac sort of divisions. There's going to be thoracic, abdominal. You can even reach the renal parts as well. Okay, so again, vagus nerve, wandering nerve, and this is something that you know already. You know about the vagus nerve. You know about the vagus nerve is the main parasympathetic nerve in our body, right? So yeah, the examination is the same. Again, get them to say check the speech. Again, look for the pharyngeal reflex, see if there's any asymmetry. A big thing in the examination is to look out for a bilateral bilateral paralysis of the vagus nerve. This is very important because the vagus nerve is responsible for the opening of the larynx and whatnot. So if you have a paralysis of the vagus nerve, specifically bilaterally, so both sides, that means the larynx can't open, which is part of your windpipe, which connects to your windpipe, and that means that becomes closed, and then that means the patient can't breathe, so they start choking out, and essentially very fatal. So if you have a bilateral paralysis of vagus nerve, that's a big red flag that you should definitely intubate the patient, because they can easily die like very quick. All right. And yeah, this is also known as a bulbar paralysis. A bulbar paralysis is just a fancy word of saying lower motor neuron lesion of of a particular nerve. So basically all the nerves below the nucleus, the nucleus that we were just talking about. If there's a lesion there, all the nerves get broken, and then you're going to have bilateral paralysis on both sides. Both sides are going to have problems. If you have a unilateral paralysis of vagus nerve, you may have a problem with speech, for example. So, for example, the vocal cord, half of it is going to contract and make sounds, the other half won't. So you're going to have dysphonia. You're going to have difficulty speaking. Also, the vagus nerve innervates the larynx, which actually contains the recurrent laryngeal nerve. That's the main nerve that actually gets you to speak. So if you have a paralysis there, you're not going to be able to articulate properly. So you're going to have dysphonia. And as well as that, because it's responsible for swallowing, you can have dysphagia. You can have a lot of saliva build up, food building up because it's not actually going down. In fact, it even comes out from the nose because the nasopharynx isn't closed. Because actually, when you stimulate the gag reflex, the nasopharynx actually closes. But now that we don't have the reflex because the vagus nerve is paralyzed, food can actually go up the nasopharynx, and that's really disgusting, right? But yeah, that's pretty much it. Causes of like a paralysis of the vagus nerve. A big example is something called the Wallenberg syndrome. The Wallenberg syndrome is a syndrome that is basically a stroke in the medulla oblongata. So that can affect all the nerves like the 9, 10, 12, and you'll learn about it later in the syndromes of the brainstem. But yeah, just to give you context, causes of things which can damage the vagus nerve is something called the Wallenberg syndrome, and that's basically an infarction or stroke in the medulla oblongata.